the river and across the creek. Don't get a letter but once a week. IdaRed, can't make a living for IdaRed. IdaRed, can't make a living for IdaRed. IdaRed began plump, 84 inches around the rump. IdaRed began plump, 84 inches around the rump. IdaRed, can't make a living for IdaRed. IdaRed, can't make a living for IdaRed.
Most people allowed that IdaRed was the best darn coon dog in Oklahoma. My dad figured she was the best coon dog in the United States. But the man actually in charge of IdaRed, Uncle Salty, said she was the best coon dog in the world, and he had proof. IdaRed always quickly treated a raccoon every time they went out of an evening to coon hunt, and she always got the perfect size of raccoon. Here's how it worked. Uncle Salty figured out, when IdaRed was still a pup, that if he showed her the size of the board he wanted to tan the raccoon hide on, then she would find a raccoon that would perfectly fit it. There was no carpentry work involved for Uncle Salty. He would decide on the size of hide he wanted, get the correct size of board, show it to IdaRed, and they were off. Now one day, IdaRed didn't come home for supper. Uncle Salty usually let her out of her dog pen in the morning so she could roam around the house, the fields, and the woods. But she never roamed far and was always there in the evening to be fed. Well, I say always, but on a rare occasion, Ida would play with Rusty, the golden retriever, down the road and lose track of time. So Uncle Salty wasn't too concerned. However, the next day, when she still wasn't around, he began to wonder. He did a bit of checking in the woods near the house and asked a few neighbors, but no one had seen Ida. On the third day, Uncle Salty knew something was dreadfully wrong. He got his rifle and gear and set off into the woods behind his house. He went all the way through his property without seeing Ida. Then he crossed a barbed wire fence and got onto the Perkinses' property, where they had permission to hunt, and he walked all over the more than 200 acres of that property and still didn't find her. Finally, he crossed over into another neighbor's land, which bordered on the Neosho River. He had never hunted on this property and couldn't see Ida coming all this way, but he just knew she had to be in the woods somewhere. She hadn't been seen on the county roads, and she did not get into cars with strangers or even approach them. So the only place she could be was in the woods somewhere, and just before dark, Uncle Salty found her. Oh, she was a pitiful thing, exhausted, panting, red-eyed, and limp as wet string, lying at the base of a huge sycamore tree along the river. Uncle Salty couldn't see any blood or cuts or visible wounds on her, but something was wrong, because she couldn't even lift her head or wag her tail when she saw him. She barely opened her eyes, and then closed them as he picked her up. Uncle Salty was getting along in years, but he carried that darn dog for miles across all those acres of woodland. He had to stop several times to rest and to check that Ida was still breathing. But eventually, when the moon had set high in the night sky, they made it home. For days afterwards, Uncle Salty nursed IdaRed as if she were his firstborn child, buying and feeding her special food with vitamins in it, and even getting her a fancy store-bought chew toy that he would never have imagined he would pay hard-earned money for. The vet said that the only thing that was wrong with her was exhaustion and dehydration, and so before long, IdaRed was back to her normal self, and Uncle Salty still didn't know what had happened to her in those lost 3 days. In all this recuperation time, IdaRed had been staying on the screened-in front porch and had only taken a brief foray outside each day to relieve herself. Now, it had been a few weeks since that day IdaRed disappeared, and Uncle Salty's wife, Aunt May, sent him around to the screen house to carry out some tubs of material that were too heavy for her. The screen house was attached to the back of the house, and it was Aunt May's place, where in cool months she worked on craft projects, mended clothes, and did some ironing. It was not a place that Uncle Salty ever visited or had anything to do with, even though it was just on the other side of IdaRed's dog pen. Lately, Aunt May had been cleaning out the screen house, and some of the things she had moved out were still leaning against the outside wall. On the wall, nearest the dog pen, in plain view for IdaRed to see, was Aunt May's ironing board. She had stripped off the cover and cushion, and the bare wood board didn't even look like an ironing board. It looked like... When Uncle Salty saw this, the mystery was solved. Surely, IdaRed was the best darn coon dog in the world.
Down the river and across the creek, don't get a letter but once a week. IdaRed, IdaRed, can't make a living for IdaRed.